privilege of giving, and we ask, Lord, that you'd overwhelm each one who gives this evening. Overwhelm them with joy and help them, Lord, to know your peace. And I pray it, Lord, in the name of Jesus. Amen. You may be seated.
Right. I had in here and realized I had not saved tonight's sermon to saved over here. It's basically saved over here on this computer on the network. Now, normally Abby does all that except for Sunday nights. I tend to do that myself because I finish up preparing the afternoons for Sunday. So I have a rhythm. Monday and Tuesday, the whole time preparing for Sunday. So usually by Wednesday, I'm well through the same morning, other than maybe an added detail here or there. Spend all day Wednesday night, and then Thursday or Sunday night. And Sunday afternoon, I go home and I finish Sunday night, and so I usually kind of put together the multimedia slides myself. All the rest of them, Abby does those. Anyway, so I got in here, and I realized I had set up slides, but I have to save it to this computer over here through the network, or it doesn't work. And I got in here and realized, I don't know if you all wanted to know that tonight. What now? I come over here tonight, and there was a little white ball. I thought it was a rubber ball. And so I picked it. It was matching, and it was white chocolate. A ball of white chocolate. Who did that? It was right along through here. I'm just saying. Did you see it? He's behind you. They ain't her. I already did. I have this piece of white ball. One of those lemons you sit on the door. Patrick is a chocolate connoisseur. So if you want to know what kind, just can sniff it or something. Middle of the 4th century. Yep. Constantine was the Roman emperor. The name of the worldwide church prior to Constantine, Christianity had been outlawed in the Roman. Constantine changed that. Some would say for the bad, but nevertheless, he changed that. And so the church was being set up in a world kind of way. The Bishop of Jerusalem, this is history. Jerusalem sent a letter. Bishop of Rome, who was at the time. And he asked to determine what was the birth that could be celebrated. Now, I'll share with you, most of this I pulled. If you have the commentary on Luke from Dr. John MacArthur, a lot of this information is in there if you'd like to go look at more, and you look at more of it. Anyway, so he wrote to the bishop in Rome. The Bishop of Rome could not really know what was the actual birth date of Christ. Honestly, we don't actually know today, not really, what the actual date was. But the Bishop of Rome sent back to Jerusalem December 25th. But at the very minimum, the Bishop of Rome had questions. December 25th fell within the frame in that month that pagan religions all over the world used to celebrate. And so there were pagan days in all parts of the world that time in the month of December toward the end of December, particularly December 25th. That date began to kind of etch church canon, if you will. by the fourth century, or by the end of the fourth century, I should say. This is the middle of the fourth century. By the end of that century, December 25th had kind of become, this is the 500s AD, had become the date to celebrate Christ. The bishop's intention was, since all these pagans were celebrating in all ways, for instance, how were they celebrating? That date, the kind of the song for winter. Trees were dead, everything was dead, and so many of the celebrations as an effort to kind of revive nature, if you will. It would grow back in the spring, and that was part of these celebrations. They were huge celebrations. They would eat and all these big banquets. There were parties. They would adorn their houses with evergreens. And adorning their houses with evergreens was in an effort to invite back the, what do you call them, the deciduous trees that come back out again. To invite those back, plants that would bloom. They would adorn their houses with mistletoe. As part of that whole celebration, they exchanged gifts. There was a general kind of a merry-making celebration that was held there. So the idea was, well, with all these pagans celebrating in December, then Christians can move the pagans out, and they can celebrate a Christ-centered holiday. So his intention kind of happened. Christians began to celebrate, and the pagans didn't stop. And now we're kind of a combination today. This is not a against Christmas. Okay, it's not a rant. But what it is we begin to look at Luke 2 tonight and next week. We're going to look at maybe outside of John 3:16, which is only one verse. So probably the most familiar passage in the Bible. Very likely. Now, John 3:16 is a single verse. It's a very familiar verse. But Luke 2 is one of the most familiar passages in the Bible. One of the things we started doing last night is read December 1st, read Luke a night. And you will have finished Luke by New Year's, or by Christmas Eve, not New Year's Eve, by Christmas Eve, 24 chapters of Luke. You say, oh, I'd like to do that. Well, start tonight, and you'll finish on Christmas. So, or by the end of December, maybe a few days, and by the end of December, you've read through Luke. That's just an FYI. I don't know why I brought that up, except that we're in Luke, too. We'll be in Luke tonight, reading this passage. This is such a familiar chapter worldwide. What's the challenge of studying a passage so familiar? What is the challenge? What's that? Yeah, you kind of just get used to it. How many of you, what's that? Just to see a fresh view of it. How many of you have a car that's at least 10 years old? A lot of us, right? Yeah. So if you've got a car that's at least 10 years old, somewhere, somehow, someplace that has a rattle or a squeak or a vibration. The thing is, if you drive that car every day, you may not even notice it. You've just gotten used to it. You get someone who's never ridden in your car, and they sit in, and they hear all of it because it's brand new. Studying a passage of Scripture that's so familiar, the challenge of fresh eyes. Kind of look at it with a new view. Our houses are like that. We have, in the, or we might have a cobweb that we've just gotten so used to. I have cobwebs in my corner. Well, okay, but we do in my house. Sorry. Not a lot, but I'm just saying, they're there. And you get used to these things, and sometimes you don't even see the stuff. You get so used to it. You bring someone who's never been in your house before, they probably notice it. You sound like just had a personal recent experience with this, right? The thing is, when you go to a passage of Scripture that's so familiar, the great challenge is going to it with fresh eyes. Now, how do we do that? Well, as I was looking at Christmas in the Christian church, I just gave you a general, a lot more detail how we got all the traditions we celebrate today. In fact, even it was said that Martin Luther even had a Christmas tree, and he decorated it with balls, which sounds like a very tenuous decoration. Corrine, let's don't do that. Yeah. But he said the candles represented the stars in the sky that were above the manger where Jesus lay. So there are all these celebrations that have happened. Luke 2, 1 through 20, displays the most of Christmas. It is the most expression of Christmas, which is opposed to the celebration of Christmas we now have. I love all the parts of celebrating. I celebrate Christmas. I just do. I like the decorations, and I like the traditions, and I like the things we do. And you say, yeah, but some of those things started in a pagan background. It's all right because I don't acknowledge them that way. I like all this. I like the family coming together, and I like being able to be in your pajamas all day on Christmas when you don't have to travel. So all that kind of stuff. And so, but as we look at Luke 2, it displays such a very simple story. And so we're going to try to get through it tonight and next week. Luke 2, beginning in verse 1 through verse 20, and by grace, our attempt is to maybe see it with fresh eyes. I looked at my notes 3 years since I've preached through this passage. I don't necessarily offer Luke 2 every Christmas. I find different ways to take Scripture Christmas from kind of a different view. Not in next week, that's what we're going to do. As we're going to use the title, The Christmas Change. The Christmas Change, at least for tonight. Luke 2, verses 1 through 7. We're going to consider when Christ has appeared, many dramatic changes. Christ appears. Let's consider some of the possible changes when Christ appears. When he appeared then and when he appears to us. So there's both things going on. Luke chapter 2, beginning in 1. And it came to pass, it happened. Luke is a doctor, but he's a historian. Ironically, we're studying Luke volume 2 on Sunday mornings. Both of which, the Gospel of Luke and Acts, are to a gentleman named Theophilus. Both of them. And so when Luke and Acts first kind of put in the Scriptures, they viewed as volume 1 and 2. Names kind of got tweaked along the way. So it came to pass, Luke the historian, in those days, it's kind of imprecise, isn't it? In fact, I'm going to show you something. Look at chapter 3, verse 1. You see how precise? Everybody see that? Chapter 3, verse 1? That's pretty precise. You see, he mentions the 15th year of the reign of Caesar. So that's the national ruler. Pontius Pilate being governor of Judah. That's the regional. Herod being tetrarch of Galilee. That's kind of the city, if you will. His brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea. And that's just a statement to mark where they were in history. in the region of Trachonitis, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene. So he mentions all these rulers that were in place. And if you tracked all those as they overlapped, you could really nail down almost the exact time he's talking about. Whereas in chapter 2, in verse 1, it says, it came to pass in those days. What does that suggest about Luke's knowledge of the timing? Yeah, he didn't, yeah. Exactly. Say, well, God inspired the scriptures, God knew. Well, he did, but maybe he didn't tell Luke to write it down. No, he obviously didn't tell Luke to write it down. So there's kind of an imprecise. Honestly, there's a little bit of wiggle room on the exact year Christ was born. That doesn't change the deity of Christ or the virgin birth or any of that. But there's a little question about the exact year Christ was born. So it came to pass in those days that a decree, a dogma, this is like an opinion ordinance. This is nothing to ignore. Right? It's like if you get an envelope in the mail and it says "our," just kind of gives you the willies. Right? And you don't just throw that away. You know, maybe if I ignore it, it'll go away, right? Well, this one you don't ignore. That's a decree. It's from Caesar Augustus. Caesar Augustus ruled somewhere around 27 BC to AD 14. And that was kind of his time. So you would see that he would be in this time frame. So it went out from Caesar Augustus that the world should be registered. Now, when it says the world, it's speaking of the Roman Empire. So, Pastor, are you saying the Bible's not accurate? Well, he wasn't registering North America or South America. He's all the Roman Empire, all their known world at the time, is what would be registered. Everything under the Roman influence, which is an enormous amount of space. So all the kind of that Roman world would be registered. Now, question. What is the purpose of a census? What does it do? Taxes. What else? Anybody know? Military. Yeah, it gives the idea of how many are under my rule. Today in America, it determines vote districts too, or if your state has how many it has, or how that kind of thing. How many electoral votes? That's a big deal for a census, right? David did it one time and got in trouble, and he was doing it to boast. In his case, and that might lend itself more to what Micah just said. It suggests the breadth and the width of your rule, and that's what David did. In this particular case, Jews were actually exempt from military service under the Roman Empire. So this is exclusively for taxation. The Jews learned to view the census as just another sign that the boot of the great Roman Empire was on their necks. And they learned to despise it. They learned to despise it. Taxes have been an issue since the get-go. God established a system of tax government. There's a right. Debate about that. So we know there was a census that took place. By the way, this is actually set up a series census that would happen every 14 years. Really, when this census was declared by Caesar Augustus, it really set up a cycle. And what do we do? A census every 10 years, right? 10 years? Is that right? 10 years. Did it every 14 years. And it set that up. So this wasn't just one deal, but it was the first of many that would go forward. So Caesar Augustus issued a census. All the world should be taxed. It's a political move. How many of you know that while Caesar Augustus thought he was issuing a census for his purposes, God was making it happen for his? And here's one thing that you'll want to note. When Christ shows up, there is a change in political plans. When Christ shows up, all the world was affected. At least all the Roman Empire was affected by the decree of Caesar, a political decree for a census with taxes and military service and the whole deal. Caesar Augustus thought he was in control, and actually God was moving chess pieces into place. And whether it was then, as Christ came on the earth, or whether it's now, if Christ is in our lives, there's a lot of discussion about the political debate in our current culture. And people want to talk about how sometimes violent it is, and it is. Back to our nation. You know who got into fistfights in Congress back in the 1700s and 1800s. You do know that. It's not as if uncivil political discourse just started. There were men who would go out and have duels and shoot each other on the Capitol lawn because of political issues. So things haven't changed all that much, really. There are more people, there's social media, but quite frankly, political discourse has always been a little uncivil from the beginning of our nation. There just never was a point. People talk about how I wish we could go back to when political discourse was civil. I don't know, when was that? I mean, there's always been a group that would be civil. Look, President Bush, 41st, George Bush, who passed away. That was a man who seemed to be able to debate political policy as general. I will grant you that. But all the others who weren't. They were totally uncivil. And the same is true with every president. So the idea that there was this time in our, it's like, sometimes it's like the Israelites. Boy, I wish we could go back to Egypt. We had everything great there. We had all kinds of food, and you were slaves, and they beat you. But sometimes our memories are a whole lot better than it actually was. But all that said, that's the culture, right? What concerns me is if I see incivility creeping in to Christians discussing politics. That's when I get concerned. And in particular, if you're a member of this church, we should deal with politics. We should address issues. We should be involved. But the moment we become uncivil, we have allowed the political process to trump our testimony and the name of Christ. And shame on us if we do that. Up in our lives, there will be a change in political plans. Maybe the way you before changes. Maybe Maybe the way you discuss politics changes. Maybe the way you think about politics. I was just talking to a friend of mine recently. His father-in-law just found out he has severe cancer. His father-in-law is incredibly involved in politics in Florida. In fact, he is the Republican chair of a very large city area, so he's very involved in all midterms. And it's kind of life. And he told me, I really don't know that he's saved. Maybe it is that politics were like most about it because he's just something that you have a new leader. It every day. all the way. So it's a change in plans. So all everyone to where? Anybody know what the action means? Yeah, or the city of their family's origin. It may not have even been with a personal, but where are your people from? Your ancestral. I was born where my ancestors are from, Jefferson County, Tennessee. That's where I was born, and that's where my ancestors are. Actually, we traced all the way back to Pennsylvania. This is a neat story. The first Ellison in my family that came to America came in through Pennsylvania. His name was John. And he had a son named Andrew. I'm serious. Listen. No, my dad sent me this stuff before he passed away years ago. He sent me a boatload of it that he had uncovered. Andrew captured by a tribe in Pennsylvania State. I don't even know what tribe it was. And they thought he was gone, he's dead. And he actually showed back up like 6 months later. Yeah, right. Hurt elbow, right? Yeah. Anyway, but really, my family ancestry goes back generations in Jefferson County. I mean, I guess if I was looking way back, it goes back to Ireland, but Scotch-Irish. Well, in this case, you're looking at your ancestral home, whether it was where you were born, but you had to go back there. So what we have now is all of a sudden people, they're not going to ignore it. And you might be 2 miles, you might be 200 miles. Heck, in that day, 20 or 30 miles could be a hardship just to get there. Especially the way Israel is set up in this mountainous terrain, and then back in that day with the lack of probably really effective roads all the way through. Literally, this phrase means the city of himself. Look at verse 4. And so Joseph also went up from where? Galilee is at the northernmost end of Jerusalem. Everybody got that? You've got the Sea of Galilee at the north. You've got the Dead Sea that comes out of the Sea of Galilee that runs in, or you've got the Jordan River that runs out of the Sea of Galilee. The Jordan River runs into the Dead Sea far south end of Israel. In fact, the northern city of Israel is Dan, and the southernmost is Beersheba. It's 150 miles from one end to the other. About the size of, a little larger than New Jersey. So here is Joseph in Galilee, particularly in Nazareth. Nazareth is it sits in between the Sea of Galilee and the Mediterranean Sea. And I got to tell you, when we went into Nazareth, I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. So you go into Nazareth, now it's all built up. And we rode in on the bus when we were in the Holy Land, and I looked over, and one of the first things I saw was a storefront and some guys working on cars, and it was a business, no lie, it was named Pimp Yo Ride in Nazareth. And so that was not what I was expecting, right? Stars and Bucks Coffee. Nice. There's no copyright infringement there. But of course, back in this day, Nazareth was even a town. It was not even a village. Like a blip on the map, and that's where Joseph was coming out of. So he was out of the city of Nazareth into Judea to the city of David, which is called what? How many of you know Jerusalem is called the city of David? Why is Jerusalem called the city of David? David kind of built it to a large degree. But so then why would Bethlehem be called the city of David? David's, yes, whose family Joseph was out of. Why does that matter to us? That Joseph was from out of the family of David? Because it's a prophecy, right? And Mary, yeah, on both sides. By the way, it's Micah 5:2, the book of Micah 5:2. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old and from ancient times. That is a prophecy that was made about 500 and something years prior to the birth of Jesus, which is now about to happen in Bethlehem. So that's where Joseph is going, to Bethlehem. And it says, according to verse 5, he's going to be registered with Mary. Now let me tell you, typically, the wives did not come. Typically, the husband would go and register. He wouldn't uproot his whole family, carry him across the country. He wouldn't. Reckon why Joseph took Mary. Don't say because it's prophecy. I'm serious. Literally, from a human perspective. Did y'all hear that? This is the one thing that really stuck in my mind. He said to get her away from all the turmoil. What turmoil? She's supposed to be a virgin. She's pregnant. If I leave her alone, I'm not sure what could happen to her. Now, I got that. Where from the human side, God had to give Joseph a reason to take Mary. Because the fact is, even though she said, well, she was pregnant, he wanted to be there, it would have made a lot more sense. Okay, the government demands that you go register. You got to go do it, Joseph. But Allah will help. Leave your wife there around the people who can take care of her, your whatever doctor or physician you might have, that kind of thing, or a nursemaid, all that, the people to support and help in the birth. I mean, it doesn't really make sense to pick her up and carry her about 80 miles. And so that's, I don't know, Warner Robins to Morrow, I guess, give or take. Walking. How long does it, anybody know how long it takes you? Has anybody ever walked from Warner Robins to Morrow? Probably not. Yeah, if you didn't stop, but we're thinking of the roads we have. We're thinking of just us, not a pregnant woman who's, 9.5 months pregnant or whatever. So it doesn't make sense, is what I'm saying, that Joseph brings her. Because it's not typical. That generally doesn't make sense. But it did. Why? Why really did Joseph take Mary to Bethlehem? Because that's where Jesus was prophesied to be born. Now, God used all these other factors, and that's what God does, right? He moves the chess pieces in place. He controls everything. He moved Caesar, and he moved Mary and Joseph. So watch this. When Jesus shows up, there's not only a change of political plans, there's a change in personal plans. Make no mistake about it. When Jesus showed up in my life, I remember when I was born again, I was in Southern University, and I already declared a major in, I think it was business administration. And I had this idea. I have an aunt and uncle up in Knoxville, Tennessee, who owned a sporting goods store for 25 years and did very well with it. And I really liked that idea of being involved somehow, sports or athletics with business, and that was my intent. I got saved in June, right after I graduated high school. By the time I was starting Georgia Southern, I was preparing in my mind to be involved in ministry. So, now, in fact, I talked about unenrolling and me going to Bible college. I sat down with one of our pastors at the church. Not everybody who's a pastor goes to a Bible. If you're going to go on to seminary, you're going to get all that stuff in seminary. You might actually have more opportunities for ministry on a secular campus. So I ended up going to Georgia Southern. But I'm telling you, my plans changed in a matter of weeks. Just changed rapidly. The same is true even today. As I'm walking along, and maybe Christ prompts me, maybe something I wasn't expecting, maybe a plan, and all of a sudden He redirects me. When Christ is in your life, whatever personal plans you have them, but Christ sometimes changes those, whatever that was. So there's a change in personal plans. We're with child. That's one Greek word which means a swelling. For those who might want to know that. Hey, she was swole. It literally sometimes it was used to refer to a toppling wave. Because, there's pregnant, and she was really pregnant. Verse 6. So it was that while they were there, the days were completed or came to fill. I love this related to Galatians in the time. Mary, like, I'm so full. I'm ready to be So it was that, that when you right there at the end, not that I would know, but that we've had 3 children, so I've at least been around my wife enough to know. It's like, just, doctor, into your office. I'm not leaving until you be out. Ladies, ever been there? Going nowhere to get out of me. Right? So, Savannah, she was born 2 weeks late. By C-section. And she was almost 1,000 pounds. She was born. She was overcooked. It's like, at the point, you're like a feels like another week at that point. So here's Mary. So her days were completed for her to be delivered, and she brought forth her firstborn. Luke makes that point. Why use firstborn? There are more to come. Luke is going ahead and letting us know that Jesus has brothers, and we know that. But as a historian, he puts in these markers, like a politician's name or a government leader's name, and in this case, firstborn, which reinforces to us, okay, there are other children to come, or other sons to come, firstborn son. What's that? I'm sorry, say that one more time, Gary. She was a virgin, yeah, and it reinforces she had no more children prior to that. Now, by the way, when Jesus is referred to as the firstborn of the Father, that's a different word. It's a very different word. This monogenes. And that's not speaking of firstborn as in chronological. Okay, so this is a different word used for than speaking of the only begotten of the Father, just for what it's worth. The firstborn son inherited everything. Important, significant. So this word is significant for reasons. In that ancient time, they would have strips of cloth where, I don't know, but they would wrap the baby up real tight and keep his or her, their appendages tight to their body. And number one, it kept them warm, but they also felt like it helped them as they pressed against it, strengthen their muscles, their legs, their arms. It was kind of a physiological purpose behind it as well. Swaddling cloths laid him in a manger. This word manger comes from a Greek word which means to eat. I think sometimes in fact, in Luke 13, this word is used to refer to a horse stall. And so what we've got here, just the implications of it. And I realize we've got a tree out here in our foyer. It's the manger tree, right? Manger. But the implications are so huge. Philippians 2. It speaks of Christ coming, setting aside the things that were rightfully his as God, and coming to earth, becoming a servant. That dissension of Philippians 2, the heart, it is here in the fact that the God of the universe is laid in something that the cows just ate out of. So isn't that, isn't that dirty or whatever? I guess when God shows up, it sanctifies it. The same way the dirt around the burning bush was holy. How do you get holy dirt? God shows up. Right? Remember when we looked through that? Any dirt will do. Any bush will do. When God, right? Any manger will do. God showing up on it. But from perspective, you tell me, it's not God, it's my son, it's my baby, it's my child that was just born. How many of us, what would be our emotional response to having a child born and having him or her nasty thing that animals have been feeding up? Just kind of. Now, I realize the hygiene codes and that kind of stuff were a little different back in that day than they are now, but that's why people lived to be like 40 years old and they died of some disease. But still, even still, let me suggest to you that when Jesus shows up, there is a change in parental plans. There's such a shift in all that they had planned. Today, I know you do showers and you prepare the nursery, get it all ready. When we had Savannah, decided not whether she was a boy or girl. We did kind of a neutral color. Since she was a girl, so it changed everything. But you do all these preparations and you take all care. But imagine being in a situation where the baby is born, you have to do it the best you can. Everything you imagine, everything that you thought just changed because God breaks in. And I think as parents, sometimes we have an idea about things will be, kids will be, there's something different in their lives along, something radically different. Here's what I know about the first 7 verses of this passage. If they say anything to me, that when Christ shows up, change. And they become very different than what we had anticipated they would be beforehand. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing as we go. When Christ is most present in our lives, the way we respond to things is very different than maybe we thought we would. When Christ shows up in our lives, the way we speak, the way we react, the way we plan, the way we work may be very different than we thought before. What is important to us becomes very different when Jesus shows up. Now next week, we'll pick up in verse 8. We'll work all the way through verse 20 as we can look at the post-events right after the birth. Let's pray. Thank you for these truths. Lord, I pray that you would continue to help us see this very, very familiar passage. Lord, help people who are changed because Jesus is present in our lives.